Welcome to the meeting of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and which is taking place in the Barkenhoe Committee at County Hall, Glenfield, though some officers will be joining online via Microsoft Teams. At the annual meeting of the County Council held on the 18th of May, Mr Pendleton was nominated Chairman-elect to the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I have a proposer and seconder that Mr Pendleton is nominated as Chair? Can I just have a seconder? So with that, Mr. appointed Chairman of the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee 2022-23 year. And I will hand over to you for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Kat. So agenda item 2, election of Vice Chairman. And Mr Frisbee was nominated as Deputy Chairman-elect at the County Council meeting held on the 18th of May. I'm happy to propose that. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Mr Chapman. Okay. Welcome, Mr Frisbee. Agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of March 2022. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of March 2022 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Thank you. It's agreed. 4, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. 5, questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5. We've received questions from Mr Hunt. Mr Hunt has been sent the answers and the questions and answers have been published on the County Council website. So I'll take it as read. Mr Hunt, do you wish to ask a supplementary?
No supplementaries, just grateful for the answer and hope to hear from the officers in due course in that important contract. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Hunt. Okay. Item 6, to advise of any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda, and I've not been notified of any such items. 7, to declare declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Now, does any member have any interests that they wish to declare? Thank you.
No.
No, okay. Thank you, Rosita. 8, declarations of the party whip in accordance with Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. Do members here have any declarations? No? Okay. And 9, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 35. We have no presentations to take at this time. So 10, the first substantive item on today's agenda is the Corporate Climate Change Risk Assessment Review 2021, as set out on pages 11 to 60. And the Assistant Director of the Environment and Waste Management, Joe Guile, will introduce this item. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'm going to introduce James O'Brien, who is a team manager in my branch, and he is going to take you through the work of his team linked to the paper today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chair. I propose to provide initially an overview of the key points of the report, and then happy to take any feedback or questions that the committee may have. So the report itself is designed to provide the committee with the results of the outcomes from a climate change risk and resilience review and assessment exercise that's been carried out over the last couple of years. So this report is addressing the other side of the climate crisis, from which you're probably more than used to hearing about, and you're going to hear about later in the meeting. So this is dealing with how well prepared are we with dealing with the impacts of climate change, rather than how are we going to reduce carbon emissions, which you will hear about more in a moment. So it's asking the questions are, what are the risks from climate change to the Council? How resilient is the Council to climate change, both in the short, medium and long term? And it also indicates what we should be doing to mitigate any risks identified. So we are being very proactive in understanding and seeking to deal with these risks from climate change, and have been for some while, as the first comprehensive assessment of climate change risk on the Council was completed in 2011 with assistance from the Climate East Midlands. At that time, we produced a climate change risk register and also a climate change resilience action plan. And that register has been reassessed approximately every 3 years since. The current review started in late 2019 and was delayed slightly, as you can imagine, by the COVID crisis. What we found in the course of doing this review was that there has been significant improvement in the understanding of the impacts of climate change and the resulting risks. Therefore, it was decided rather than just do a reassessment of the risks, to carry out a complete review of the climate change risks and ask the question, are they the right risks? And then start from that point. I'll just now explain the structure of the report. So the report starts off by setting out the latest climate science and the latest independent assessment of UK climate risk, which has been developed by the government's own Committee on Climate Change. In terms of methodology, the report sets that out. It also presents the key findings, conclusions and recommendations, as well as the initial next steps for taking forward those recommendations. I'll just pick out a number of the key points from the climate science. So to date, globally, we've seen an average increase of 1.2 degrees C in global temperatures. And we're currently heading for somewhere between plus 2.7 and 4, if not more, degrees C by the end of the century. So the general motto from the Committee on Climate Change, which advises on this area, is that plan for plus 2 degrees, but prepare for plus 4 degrees. And that's kind of the approach that we have taken in terms of carrying out the assessment. So the other key points from the climate science is that climate change is already here, it's already happening. Further climate change will happen and it will affect Leicestershire directly and indirectly. In terms of the weather, it's predicted on average a greater chance of hotter, drier summers and warmer, wetter winters. And on pages 8 to 11 of the review report itself, or pages 29 to 32 of your packs, there's various details there of what this is likely to be. So, for example, there's a 16 times more likely to see 2 days with temperatures in excess of 30 degrees by 2070. 50% likelihood of seeing summers like we had in 2018 by 2050. And we can see this already, even the last couple of weeks, and even this week, France and Spain are experiencing temperatures in excess of 30 and 40 degrees C. India a couple of weeks ago had temperatures in excess of 50 degrees. And on the news today, we hear the horrible news of flooding in India, 70 deaths and millions of people being displaced from their homes. So this is just an example of the fact that it's here already, climate change. A couple of weeks ago, the US of A experienced 6 extreme weather events at the same time, a mix of storms, hurricanes, droughts, floods and wildfires. So reality is that climate change will affect people, the economy and the environment. A bit more detail on the methodology. So we carried out a literature review looking at the evidence, as I've mentioned, key reports, etc. In terms of the assessment process, we focused on service areas which we believe to face the highest risks from climate change themselves, or services that had a key role in managing those risks, and or services that managed long-term assets such as roads, bridges and buildings. We held interviews with relevant officers, we reviewed key documents, policy documents, strategy documents, procedural documents, etc. In terms of the risk assessment process, we had 2 forms of assessment. We had a generic assessment for kind of general or simple service areas where the risk was rather straightforward, but we also developed a custom risk assessment approach for those more complex service areas and where the risks from climate change were more complex. The key findings of the report is that Leicestershire is already experiencing extreme weather events and that more will happen. That climate change is already impacting on the County Council. We found evidence of, for example, some significant expenditure, £3 million dealing with road melting a number of year ago, £550,000 to cover additional cost of additional drainage and investigation works, £200,000 to deal with overhanging trees. And in terms of other key findings, we found that the County Council was, on balance, pretty well prepared for dealing with the short-term response to weather events. However, there was less evidence of planning for changes in the risks to more extreme weather events, particularly when it came to long-term assets that are expected to last 50, 100 plus years, for example, roads, bridges and buildings and so on. We also found some gaps in checking supplier business continuity plans, particularly in relation to climate change. It's not just our preparedness to climate change, it's also those companies that we use to provide our services we need to work to look at. We found some very good practice in the management of long-term flood risk within our flood team. We identified overall 8 high risks, particularly within highways and property, but also 56 medium risks across the service areas assessed. We also found that the corporate risk assessment process may not be suitable for assessing climate change risk due to its complex and long-term nature. And it's also difficult to consider the County Council separately from the county, its suppliers and partners, because climate change affects everyone. And there's a connection between those key parties. So just picking out some of the key recommendations from the report. Firstly, that service level action plans should be carried out by those high risk service areas. That we develop a process to budget for and quantify the additional costs of both dealing with the impacts of climate change and of adapting to climate change and increasing our resilience to climate change. There was also a recommendation around developing a council and a county-wide climate change adaptation and resilience plan. These and the other recommendations have been considered by chief officers, and proposed next steps have been agreed, including providing the report to the business continuity team, the environment policy and strategy team, meeting with the relevant service areas to start work on looking at the practicalities of developing those service level action plans, and also for the team to explore what will be involved in developing a county and council-wide climate change adaptation and resilience plan. Also, we're having and we'll continue to have discussions with the head of internal audit and assurance and the department's risk champion around reviewing the corporate risk management policy and strategy linked to the need to consider its appropriateness in assessing climate change risk. One of the interesting things that's come out of those conversations is that colleagues in assurance are getting questions from our insurance companies asking how prepared the County Council is for climate change, indicating that if the organisation is not prepared, hasn't identified its risks, hasn't got a plan in place, is likely to experience higher premiums. So the fact that we've done this work is going to save us in that regard as well, and should be a benefit to the council. So that in summary are the key points of the report, and I'm happy to take any comments, feedback or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I'll go straight to Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. On page 22, so page 14, item 22D, it says there's 8 risks need urgent attention by the government within the next 2 years. Can you tell us what the 8 risks are and how far we are with lobbying government to get those sorted out?
Okay, so those 8 risks are national risks. They're not our risks. So this was the results of the Committee on Climate Change's assessment of the risks to the UK. So it's not necessarily our role to lobby government as such on those. But if you bear with me one moment, I'll try and find what those risks are. So I can name some of them. So some of the risks identified were risks to viability and diversity of terrestrial and freshwater habitats and species, risks to crops, livestock, commercial trees from multiple hazards, risks to supplies of food, goods and vital services, power system failures due to storms, flooding and lightning, and health and productivity impacts from overheating in buildings. So as you can see, there are national level risks, but some of those will be translated locally, and we've included the local risks from those national risks in the report on page 14 of the main report.
We're happy with that, Mr. Bolter?
Yes, but I know there might be national things, but if we start getting loads of power cuts, it will affect us as a county. So I think we need to know what they're going to do about that, how they're going to mitigate that problem, because that will affect what we can do.
I think it's going to be a national issue, though, Mr. Bolter, and you're quite right. What we can do is suffer.
Yes, exactly.
We won't be the first to suffer power cuts, but of course it's the frequency. Well, I guess it's going to be the frequency of them which we will need to monitor more than anything else, but I think that other people will be on that too, and of course it's the whole agenda for the government in that sense, in terms of providing critical and new power, which it's on, of course, as we know, at a national level. Do you want to say anything, Blake?
No, I think
as a lead. No, okay.
Sorry, Chairman. Firstly, before I respond to the point that's just been made, can I congratulate you on becoming chairman for another year, and yourself, Mark, on becoming vice chairman. This is a new body that's been set up by the Leicestershire County Council. It's not been easy, especially in the middle and the back end of the pandemic, to coordinate affairs and set an agenda for this for the business of the council in this area. So congratulations, and thank you for the work you did last year. In terms of the point you just made, I totally support that. I'll just add, though, that the reason this report is before us, it's the Corporate Climate Change Risk Assessment Review. The fact that we're not notifying, but we're recording this, and as a potential risk to the county, this is the purpose of the report. So what we do about all these individual risks, that needs much further work across the corporate spectrum, but I'm pleased to see that actually we've thought about this, we're recording it, and it's on our radar that these potentially in the future could be risks arising from extreme climate change.
Thank you, Blake. Mr. Hunt?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I should start by expressing my appreciation for Blake Payne's presence here. I was on highways for a long time, and you, if I can say, always provided very cogent responses to all our questions. I didn't always agree with them, but yeah, so it's great to have have me back on this committee in a sense. I thought it was a really good report and lots of sort of concise statistics. The question I think Bill's raised is partly one of scope, what you include in the risks and what you don't. And reading through it, I just thought there were some sort of secondary risks that aren't covered here, like, for example, the risk to our financial investments through the CAFE investment fund, that if we're investing in certain things which turn out to carry a risk themselves, due to that would be a financial loss to the authority. And another one, which is perhaps beyond the scope, but it's important nevertheless, that as climate change becomes even more burdensome, we are led to understand that southern European countries, Spain, Greece, and so on, will suffer the high temperatures that you'd already referred to in India and so on, and of course in sub-Saharan Africa as well. And that will lead to inevitably to migration, and our ability as a country to respond positively to that, I think, will inevitably fall on the county council social services. So it's those kind of things that the financial risks to the authority and the social risks, maybe migration, it may be other forms of risks concerning people, perhaps need to be thought in important perhaps in the next revision of this report. Go a little bit wider. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. I don't know if officers would like to come back on that, or a lead member. If not, okay, we'll take that as understood and a risk to be noted and looked at, of course. Joanna?
I think I was just going to acknowledge, I think it's in the report, but this is why when we talk about the corporate risk register and its ability to sort of anticipate long-term risk mitigation, to the point Councillor Hunt makes, I think we're going to take that as an activity. We need to think about how we do that. Our risk register is really comprehensive, but I think climate related risks are something that it wasn't necessarily conceived to manage. So we are going to work with corporate colleagues to think about it. I think that would link into Councillor Hunt's point about over a longer period, that sort of cross-cutting nature of some of these risks and their impact. So we'll take that way. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James, for the report. My question really refers back to the adversity in terms of budgets. We spoke about melting roads, inflated prices of inspection works and overhanging trees. I don't anticipate that I'm going to receive an immediate answer for this, but how do these increased expenditures compare to historical data? As a very little boy, I remember the summer of 1976 when the roads melted and other such events. Have we got historical data to see where these spikes have happened? How does it fit in? What I'm trying to say really, are these extraordinary and consistent, or are these anticipated that this is going to happen? Is it, you mentioned 2018 as a particularly hot summer. Is the spike, is the bell arc naturally going upwards, is what I suppose I'm asking, and does it continue to do so, or historically do we have these periods where we have to attend melting roads, overhanging trees and the like?
Right, James did indicate, and I missed your indication, James, I'm sorry, in terms of the previous question as well. Would you like to answer that and maybe just touch on, if you can, Mr. Frisbee's upward curve as well?
Yeah. In simple terms, it's the frequency and the intensity of the climate change extreme weather events is going to go up.
Right.
Okay, so we can expect then our costs to go up in line with that frequency and intensity. I don't know enough about highway colleagues' costs historically to be able to answer the question how they compare, but I would imagine that it's as the cost will be incurred more often, then historically they're likely to be more expensive. £3 million is a lot of money to spend on repairing roads at any time, you know. So I think the other factor with climate change is that the extremes are going to be more extreme, in that you're going to have periods of very dry weather, but also very wet weather. So a lot of our roads and buildings are not designed to cope with those extremes. So this is why we picked up the factor around needing to think about what the weather's going to be like in 100 years' time when we're designing and building our roads, our bridges, our buildings, and so on. And that's where another cost will come in. But it's a cost, almost like an invest to save cost. It's better to build the road so it will last longer and be able to cope with the extremes in weather, rather than having to pay a repeating cost to repair it.
Okay, Mr. Frisbee. Right, further questions. I've one. County planning and the county planning committee. How long will it take to get us into a state to be better prepared? James, you've outlined that we do need to be better prepared. Fantastic. There's the area that of concern. What are our timescales like? Could you give us some indication of that?
Well, at one level, we need to be as prepared as soon as we can because it's happening now. So that will be part of the conversations we have with particular service areas, and also as part of the exercise to explore what will be involved in developing a county-wide plan. We'll seek to answer those questions. So I can't give you definitive answers now, but it will likely take us a couple of years to wide plan. And at that point, we should know more about what kind of timescales we need to be working to in terms of being ready. The other reality is that the climate science and the impacts of climate change keep changing. The actual impacts of climate change tend to be at the top end of the spectrum. So things are always at the bad end, you know, in terms of what's predicted as well. So, yeah, this issue has been tackled globally, nationally, you know, and we will be tracking and working with or reading the documents that are produced globally and by the Committee on Climate Change and by the government's other departments, etc., to inform what we need to be doing locally.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, any further questions on this item? No? Then, if I may, thank you, James. We appreciate your candidness, if that's a word I can use, and your input, and we look forward to further work being brought by you with Joe to tell us of the phases and the next stages that you're undertaking. Thank you very much indeed for this afternoon's presentation.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Right, so the next item is item number 11, which is the Leicestershire Net Zero Carbon 2045 strategy and action plan as set out on pages 61 to 227. And again, this from January's work, which this committee did, and Joe is going to lead on this item. So over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I might go through that page by page. I won't. Thank you. So the purpose of today's report is to set out the detail of an active consultation that the authority is currently undertaking on the draft Leicestershire Net Zero Strategy and Action Plan, and seek this committee's views on the documents themselves in the hope that that will then inform the final documents that we plan to produce and take to Cabinet in October of this year. And if I may, just in terms of that plan to go to Cabinet, we have proposed, and I believe through you, Chair, settled on a special meeting of this committee. I think we're looking at the 20th of October to bring back that final document to yourselves before it goes on to Cabinet. So I will just acknowledge that.
Yes,
and we'll plan for that. So the report sets out the authority's long-standing, I think, an ongoing commitment to the environment. And this committee did, as you said, Chair, consider a carbon roadmap report in January of this year, which has assisted officers in developing the information that you've got in front of you today. And that is appended to the report, but it does sort of give a summation of it in points 9 and 10 of the report today. The report today highlights the engagement that's been undertaken towards developing and enriching the content that's in the draft document, and that includes some really valuable feedback that the Council got from the recent strategic plan consultation, where more than 90% of residents felt that the clean and green agenda was fairly or very important. And that also gave us some really useful themes and concerns that we've needed to consider and incorporate. I won't go through the report in detail or page by page, but if I could just highlight that it does align to local and national targets. It has a long-term view, but has those interim, regular, short to medium term actions, sort of 4 or 5 year blocks as things evolve. It has a vision, some ambitious targets in that period up to 2045. There is a bespoke scope in terms of the amount of carbon that we're looking to drive to net zero, and that's based on best practice, and it outlines our planned approach to delivering this net zero ambition. And it commits the authority to lead where it has the opportunity, to look to partner because we simply can't achieve this agenda on our own and we shouldn't look to do so, and use its influence where it's appropriate. And it is absolutely underpinned by the ethos of collaboration, as I've mentioned. Linked to that point, there is a really strong emphasis in the document around awareness raising and informing and engaging communities and businesses and stakeholders to come on this journey with us. In terms of the action plan, then, aside from the sort of cross-cutting themes that I've just mentioned around collaboration, it's been developed under a number of thematic areas that reflect the main emission sources for carbon, and those are listed at point 40 in the report, and they're expanded on throughout the report after that. But they include areas such as decarbonising transport, green economy and climate-friendly communities, and that's just to name a couple of them, not all of them. But each of those themes has an aim and a set of objectives, and then those early activities and priority areas that they want to tackle. In terms of county council resourcing, there is a resources section in the report, and that highlights the investment by the council recently and ongoing with its £2 million environment fund to try and progress some of these priorities for the authority associated with this agenda. And the action plan itself has some commitments to work to develop further detailed business cases and a resource plan as we move hopefully into delivery later this year. I think finally, I would just highlight that the consultation itself runs until the 26th of July, and officers would absolutely value feedback from the committee so that we can try and incorporate that into the report. And I should have mentioned at the start, aside from James, who's on the call, I've also got, if he's still on the call and hasn't escaped, but I've certainly got Jana, who is my equivalent opposite in E&T, who is the Assistant Director on the Highways and Transportation side, should we have any questions around that decarbonising transport, and Katie Greenhalgh, who works in the growth unit, who is supporting us with the consultation process and is a bit of a subject matter expert when you all ask me a question I can't answer, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Joan. Well, welcome to, well, James is still with us, I know. Welcome to Jana, and welcome to Katie, who are all there for us. That's lovely. Right. Well, this is such an interdependent, interlinked series of initiatives. Under paragraph 52 there, let's see, have we any questions or observations? Mr. Bolter.
Thank you. Yes, it's an interesting report and very detailed, I expect. But I'm concerned that it's being engaging with residents on the website on the 4th of May to the 26th of July. That's only part of the inhabitants of Leicestershire, and it may well be the younger elements that actually go on the website to look at these things, and the older generation like myself wouldn't be doing that. But we need to engage everybody in the county on this very important subject. It will affect all of us in all our lifetimes, and I just wonder if there's any way you can actually do it any other way. I'd have thought that Leicestershire Matters might have been a vehicle you could actually put it on. They've had some other impact. But I wonder if you could tell us how many results you've had so far with this, not in numbers.
Chair, if I can come back through you, and then I will ask if Katie could just add some information. She certainly can elaborate on some of the numbers and the response rate that we've had, and some of the richer sort of engagement tools that we're trying to use. Just on the Leicestershire Matters, I had a chat with Katie earlier. We did reference it in the last Leicestershire Matters, but I think we were alluding to the links would become available and the relevant, so they weren't available at that point, but we certainly were signposting people early to it. And I think if we can, we'll look to do something else in Leicestershire Matters if there's an addition during the period of consultation. But if I may, I'll also offer Katie to just contribute some of the other things that we're doing in terms of engagement as part of the consultation. Thanks, Chair.
Please go ahead, Katie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Mr. Bolter, that we need everybody to engage in this topic. It's going to be a collective effort for us to achieve net zero for the county. So first of all, the consultation is available in different formats. So although we tend to point people to the web link, that's the most kind of efficient and sustainable way for us to collate responses. We do have the consultation available in different formats, and we've already posted out a handful of paper copies for people to return by post. There's a telephone number that people can contact us on to request those, so that you can avoid online access if required. We're also trying to get out to the public as much as possible through this consultation. So we're conducting a net zero roadshow. We're going to 4 country parks and 6 libraries, starting from the 10th of July. So hopefully it'll be quite visible for members of the public, and they can speak to us directly, either to request those paper copies or for us to help them complete the consultation there and then. And we're also going to be doing some kind of quick polls and collecting as much anecdotal information as possible, because we appreciate it is quite a technical and lengthy consultation document. We're also attending as many partnership events as possible. So I went to speak to the Learning Disability Partnership last week to get their feedback on the strategy and plan. We're attending the parish event next week, and we're trying to do a wide variety of communication. So we've had a lot of success with our social media channels, but as Joe said, we're also using printed media such as Leicestershire Matters to promote the consultation. And also perhaps finally just worth mentioning some work that we're doing with young people. So we're working with an organisation called Participation People to make sure that young people's voices are well represented in this consultation as well. So they employ youth researchers that co-create material specifically for young people to make it more accessible to them. So they've got a bespoke survey. They're conducting listening labs to go and hear from young people. And they've also got a creative competition for young people to engage with. So we're really trying to make the consultation as accessible and engaging as possible. And probably important to note that this is really the first step in us engaging the public on this matter. It's going to be a long-term relationship, and we're developing an engagement plan to help us look at how we can best engage with different groups and members of the public and stakeholders. So in terms of numbers, we've got just under 200 responses so far through the main consultation page. We've got about 60 responses through the youth survey, and then we've also started to collate that more anecdotal information through events and meetings that we've been attending. And I think really positive that the demographics of those responses are at the moment fairly representative of the county's averages. So we're quite pleased that we're reaching a diverse range of voices for people that are responding to the consultation.
Right, thank you, Katie. Right, wow, happy with that, Mr. Bolter?
No, not at all. Only 200 responses. What's the population of Leicestershire? Yes, so it's a minute, very minute number of people. Hence my point, we must do more consultation and get out there and actually speak to the people. I'm
going to talk now immediately then to the lead member.
Okay, so thanks, Bill. I share actually your observation. At the last lead member meeting, when I had an update about the consultation, I think we're at about 160 responses. So firstly, having said that, let me just explain that from my perspective, I've done a Facebook Live interview, I've gone on BBC Radio Leicester, I've done all the usual comms. I know this authority treats this agenda very seriously. We passed a climate emergency in 2019. I know the public treat it very seriously because we've all stood for election between then and now, and any of us that have gone door knocking, the vast majority of people that were spoken to have raised climate change as an issue, to be quite frank. So we know it's treated seriously both in our communities and here corporately as an organisation. I suspect we'll wait until the end of the consultation, but I suspect a lot of people that care passionately as we do about this agenda have concluded that they've got us into a place where they want us to be. We are taking action. This is to our credit as a county council that we've passed the emergency, we've got a set of plans, we've set up this body to scrutinise the processes and the agenda and the projects, etc., to make sure that we hit our targets. So I think we should credit ourselves that we're already cutting through, and perhaps people are satisfied that we're taking the action that they wish us to take on this front. Having said that, this consultation includes a set of proposals that include behavioural change, and it affects a large swathes of the Leicestershire community. And to that extent, we are still pushing the messages, we're still pushing the communications, and hoping that people will take the opportunity to engage with these proposals, because in some respects they will have behavioural change impacts on people out there. So I think it's only right that people have a look at that and have a say over the proposals that we have. But the fact that we've only had, say, 200 responses so far, I don't think is indicative of how seriously the climate change agenda is being taken by this organisation, or indeed the Leicestershire public at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. I think, you know, I really do think that you're right and that the public trust us. I really do. I don't think they're taking us for numpties by any means. Mr. Bolter, did you have another comment you'd like to make, or are you going to let it rest at that?
Oh, no, I'm going to take a long time on that one. I'm just a bit confused on, can't find the page number now, page 62, paragraph 9. Massive reduction demand for energy. Yes, we realise that. So promoting electric vehicles, so that's using electricity. But also, we haven't got to grips with the total cost of an electric vehicle, disposal costs of the batteries and other things. How is that taken into account in the carbon reduction and everything else? Switch low carbon fuel, yeah. But then we come down to increased carbon capture and storage. Yeah. But offset carbon, but only as a last resort for minimal residual emissions. So those two sort of are conflicting. So I don't know if Joanne can actually enlighten me on that. Offsetting carbon is the last resort. We shouldn't produce it in the first place. So we're trying to find some ways of equaling that out. So we listen to the airports, everything else. They're saying we're offsetting the carbon by planting trees, etc., etc. That's good. No, I'm not denying that. But surely, if we can try and reduce the carbon in the first place, we need to go to the next stage of carbon offsetting, because that's a different ball game. And we talk about planting trees. There's other ways of absorbing carbon apart from planting trees. I like planting trees. I'm happy with that. But there's other things we can actually do as well to absorb carbon. But it's in promoting that. We're just sort of planting trees. So, well, in Blake's, I think, maybe anybody else's. What else can we promote doing?
Okay. Blake, before I bring you in, I thought for a minute you were going to say we should stop air transport. But I mean, jet engines have become, over the last 20 years, far more efficient and much more carbon friendly. And I do hope you're not going to suggest that we take the Brits out of going abroad, Mr. Bolter. But anyhow, Mr. Payne.
Yeah, look, I think what Mr. Bolter has alluded to is the size of the challenge here. This is a global problem. We had COP26, which Britain hosted last year, where it brought all the nations together to come to some consensus about how they're going to deal with the very problem, which is how do we reduce the amount of carbon we produce. Whether we like it or not, carbon is being produced. So clearly part of the answer is to try and absorb some of that through farming techniques and improvements of the natural environment. And that leads me on to the response that this consultation isn't simply about offsetting carbon. The data is there to demonstrate how much carbon we are consuming in Leicestershire and how large a challenge we've got. But there's also themes and, very, very good projects around improving the natural environment and improving biodiversity. And actually, I think we do a lot as an authority on those themes. We recognise we have relatively low levels of biodiversity in Leicestershire, and the authority is leading and actually practising projects and improvements that help to better Leicestershire in that respect. So it's not simply about offsetting carbon. It is very much about thinking how can we help to reduce the levels of carbon as well as offset, but it's also about improving the environment in Leicestershire, not only as a place to live, but as a place to work and recreational use as well. It's really important. It's a beautiful county. It's got a lovely character, and we want to improve that character.
Joanne.
Thanks, Chair. I think just picking up on some of the broader points, and again, I'm sure Katie will do a better explanation of sort of if we need to be more clear about the difference between sort of carbon capture and offsetting, we'll take that point away, absolutely, in terms of documentation going forward. But I think perhaps picking up the point about the net zero nature of the strategy as opposed to just zero carbon. It's impossible to live our lives and be involved in producing goods and services and not produce carbon. So it is not a zero carbon strategy. There will have to be some netting off, whether that's sequestration and tree planting or by other means. But I suppose before I bring Katie in, all I would add is that we absolutely have a hierarchical approach to it, so that the strategy is not sort of based on can we go to admirable as it is planting trees in the Amazon rainforest as a means to offset all of our carbon. We apply the hierarchy and we tackle the challenging priorities first before we then realise what the residual balance is that we'll have somewhere down the line. But Katie, I'm sure, will do a really good job of explaining the capture versus offset. Thank you.
Okay, we'll bring Katie in a second then. So good. Just to develop the point, Mr. Bolter, I think the word is net. It is not zero, and I think that's where we are going to have to draw our baseline. Okay, Katie, would you like to add anything else now?
Yeah, I just thought I'd kind of cover that hierarchy in a bit more detail. So it is outlined in the approach section of the strategy. So we've got kind of a staged approach to tackling our carbon emissions. So first of all, we reduce the emissions as far as possible by changing the way that we do things. Then we would look at fuel switching. So for example, going from petrol to electric vehicles, which would again reduce the level of emissions. And then once we've got emissions as low as possible through efficiencies and switching, we look at the kind of absorption of carbon within the county boundary. So there's a whole theme around nature and land use, which starts to cover this topic, but it's really looking at both tree planting and the way that we manage and utilise our land to maximise the amount of greenhouse gases that it can absorb. So that's our kind of priority of how we address emissions. And if there's any residual emissions left after that we can't stop emitting and we can't absorb within the county boundary, then we finally look at that offsetting piece, which is looking at how we can support projects which reduce emissions in other localities. So that's why that comes right at the bottom, because we want to be focusing on our contribution within Leicestershire as far as possible.
Thank you, Katie. We'll also say, of course, that at the last election, the Conservatives did pledge to plant trees for the whole equivalent to the whole of the population of Leicestershire, and I'm already very happy. And I just want to say to Jana, who I know will have followed this through, that I'm very happy that the bypass in my neck of the woods has been planted already, and that just shows, I think, just how fast the authority is actually prepared to move and how nimble it is. And again, I'll put on record that we're grateful for that, and I'm sure that we shall continue to be doing just that. Right, any further questions or comments on this particular thing? Max?
Okay, I've got 2 or 3 points. First of all, the title of the strategy is Carbon 2045. It's a bit unfortunate, really, because it suggests that we've just got to get to that winning post, if you like, of 2045. But if you look at, I won't ask everybody to turn to the right page, but one of the parts of the consultants report, which I thought was also very good, says that talks about the pace of change, and there's a graph which illustrates whether we're conforming to the Paris Agreement in that trajectory. And it's saying basically that we may get to 2045 as net zero carbon, but unless we do it at the speed that Paris Agreement projects, we will be using twice as much carbon getting there as we're supposed to. In other words, I think it says it, Leicestershire will emit 43 megatons of carbon dioxide, etc. Whereas we were only given 22 megatons, and that's on page 84 or 144 of your agenda. It's the third column. So to say 2045 isn't sufficient. It's the amount of carbon we use before we get there that's the important thing, and therefore the speed, the pace of change, as it refers to, which is the important thing. But I understand that everybody uses a date target to go for, and it's perhaps easier for people to understand. But below that, there is this problem that unless we go faster, we're not going to meet Paris target of 1.5 degrees, etc. The other point I wanted to make was about what we can and what we can't do. There's lots of things we can't do. I think this report could be a lot simpler. Basically, the things we have to do are better insulation and heat pumps and things in homes. We can't do much of that. We'll eat less meat, red meat. That's up to people's. It's perhaps up to the agricultural community. I don't know, and a few other things. But the one that's staring us in the face is transport and the assumption that we're all going to be driving around in electric vehicles, including HGVs, quickly, because, as I say, time is of the essence in this thing, and that seems to me more of a hope than a certainty, but let's assume that's going to happen. But we also, in addition to that, apparently, according to the consultant's report, page 144 of our documentation, reduced vehicle mileage. Now, I don't know how Jo gets on with her assistant director for transport, but you're both saying opposite things. One assistant director is saying we've got to reduce vehicle mileage, and the other director is saying we've got to increase vehicle mileage. As we've got more people coming into the county, we've got to build the roads in order for them to get to work and so on. Now you can't be both, and the danger of this whole strategy is that it's built to look nice and to say the right things, but other departments in this authority, as well as in government, are doing the opposite things. We talk about, building new coal mines and so on and that sort of thing, but this business of road transport is really important, and the report is coming down very clearly that we should be doing less of it. Meanwhile, the Transport Department, this authority, is doing more of it.
I'm going to let, no takers from okay, I'm going to let Joanne deal with this first.
I'll then hand over to colleagues. There's a few things, Councillor Hunt, there, and I think some of them are just acknowledging absolutely the period out to 2045, and the point about whether there are any of the pathways, that the trajectories, even the really ambitious trajectories in the roadmap report that we use to inform this draft strategy. We're not on a compliant pathway, but we haven't fully developed that pathway yet. I think I use the term we need to get on the ride and we are progressing. And I think this hopefully picks up Councillor Hunt's point. If we wait until we know if the technology is available or the capacity to do some of the things that we don't yet know we will wait too long. So I think the point is validly made that pace is critical. All I would add is that there are very few authorities that have developed or identified a Paris compliant pathway at all. And I think that just reflects the fact that we are delivering in the absence of all the information, but we are all trying to move forward. And I think point 30 of the covering report, I think acknowledges the ambition that aside from the 2050 national target, and we've gone for 2045 as a county area, so more ambitious again, there is also this interim target that I think just corroborates the fact that you cannot assume to wait till the end of this trajectory. We have to be doing the high priority areas across all those themes. Otherwise, we will not try and hold to as close as we can that ambitious pathway. So I think we've tried to incorporate it, but we can absolutely have a look and see if we think it's sufficiently clear, that interim target. I think that point has been made by colleagues outside of the member forum, so we'll pick that up. I think the other point was already made earlier in relation to consultation and the sort of technical nature of this document. It is incredibly weighty if it's going to sort of acknowledge best practice, but I think Katie mentioned earlier that we're going to develop an engagement plan. We would not use this document for the purposes of engaging with people under the age of 15, for example, or whatever. You know, we need to be thinking about the appropriate tools for the right audience, and can it be succinct and punchy so that people feel inclined to engage. And that is one of the activities that are in that sort of climate friendly communities element of the plan. I'm going to let Jana come in on whether she and I will clarify through you, Chair, that we certainly do get on. We don't tend to end up at fisticuffs, and Anne makes sure as our director that we do. But we do acknowledge, I think, all I would add before Jana does is it just shows the scale of the challenge, that there will be growth, there will be new houses, new communities. So even to stand still is quite challenging. The amount of carbon arguably will just inflate. So the ambition is, of course, we almost have to cut harder to keep up with the reduction ambition. But I'll allow Janet to come in, Chair.
Thank you, Joanne. Of course, I've got one or two little comments of my own as well. Janet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to wait if you wanted to come in first.
Oh, no, you go first.
OK, just stop me if I get lost in this. I think Councillor Hunt's points are really valid. And yeah, I can absolutely confirm that whilst I do get on with Jo, I'm aware that our agendas don't always fit nicely together. And over the next few years, I think there will be some really difficult questions for us in terms of priorities and you know, not to sort of take too easy to be said too easily, but for you as county councillors in the decisions that we take and how difficult they may be to implement on the ground. We've seen some of that around active travel measures before, for instance, and whether we are in reality willing to give up road space in order to accommodate those and that type of thing. But I think in terms of where we do going forward, you'll notice that we're putting a lot of thought into the carbon reduction agenda in our local transport plan development. So we have a local transport plan that sets out LCC's approach to transport and highways in Leicestershire. We're developing a new one at the moment. And as part of that, we invited members to an all-member briefing recently about how we deal with the challenge of net zero in our policy, and to be honest, it reflects a lot of what has been put in the net zero strategy at the moment, that we are going to have to, and I think just we are going to have to reduce vehicle kilometres travelled. I think though there is something to be put into context in terms of where new development is coming forward, that you can't expect the new development to do no miles and let everybody else carry on what they're doing before. That's going to, and fairness and equity is a big theme running through this. So what we've got to do, I think, is overall encourage everybody to reduce those vehicle miles through behaviour change, which we've talked about, and make sure that that doesn't sort of inequitably reduce opportunity, access to education, employment, services, that type of thing. And if I'm honest with you, from a highways and transport point of view, I'm really going to be lobbying hard at government level. There are some policy changes that we need to see, some sticks, if you like, at that level, that, you know, perhaps charging related to help reduce those vehicle miles. That again, I think would be fair to say if we just did in Leicestershire on our own, we would then again be at risk of harming our investment prospects or other things as well. And some of the stuff needs to come at a national level. I also take the point, I mean, in our presentation that we put forward before, that even on the sort of, assuming that we can move to electric vehicles, and I take the point made about whether we've got the infrastructure and the capacity to do that all in one go. That clearly wouldn't necessarily work as well. That doesn't complete our net zero requirements. It's a big part of it, but it's not the only thing. And so we are going to have to, in this local transport plan that's being developed at the moment, really make quite a shift on that and look to minimise the additional vehicle miles that are being done. That fits into planning. We'll work very closely with the planners. You need services to be local. You need employment to be local. You need those that whole place approach really to achieve the net zero targets that we have. And I do agree that we are a massive part of it in highways and transport. Just lastly, I think another thing that we need to work with our partners at National Highways, at government and other councils about is the fact that actually quite a lot of or a significant proportion of our transport emissions are from, loosely termed as, just passing through traffic. So we've got a great strategic road network connection. We've got airports, we've got big employment, we've got distribution in the area, and actually that has an impact on emissions, but we're not necessarily the origin or destination for those sort of kilometre miles, vehicle kilometres that are being done. And so again, we can't influence that on our own, and we need to make sure that we're working with partners to do it. So just in summary, Chair, I think probably clear from what I've said that we don't have all the answers. We are aware of those challenges, and we will, really look to try and address them as far as we can through LTP4, and members will be part of that process. And if it's helpful, just in answering some of those, we can make that presentation available for members if they haven't had chance to review it or see it, just to kind of demonstrate the kind of thinking that's been going on around it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. Blake?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So from my perspective, the strategy is a Leicestershire strategy. It's Leicestershire County Council's stab at doing something about the climate change problem. We've already committed to becoming net zero as an authority by 2030, and as Joe's already pointed out, this strategy deals with wider Leicestershire. We already know the Parliament has committed to 2050, so we again feel it's a bit of a credit to us that we've tried to accelerate that progress and set some kind of arbitrary deadline by 2045, and we've got to have something to work to. And indeed, if we can meet our targets way before then, brilliant, even better. But the strategy seeks to, deal with the wider Leicestershire carbon issue by 2045. But the report also makes it clear that it's not going to be easy. That's why it sets out the balanced approach. To achieve the Paris climate change approach would mean such behaviour change that it's just not in the gift of the county council. To get people to do that, it will take, national legislation to be able to prohibit people from using aeroplanes, etc. It's just not feasible to get to that target by the date set out by the consultants' reports, which is why we're supporting the balanced approach, a pragmatic approach, which will require Leicestershire people to make small changes to their life, but hopefully we can continue to have a life. We can continue to go about our daily business and enjoy Leicestershire and enjoy the world. In terms of transport, it's a really good point Max makes. No one's denying that. But again, car ownership has gone up over the last 20 years. There are millions of more cars on the road. We can't do anything about that from Leicestershire County Council. What technology will do, and electric vehicles in particular, it will limit the carbon footprint of those vehicles, but it won't necessarily stop the volume of vehicles from using the road. It will just lessen the carbon footprint. So again, it's not in our gift to pull up the portcullis in Leicestershire and stop traffic coming up the M1. It's going to require national solutions to deal with the volume, which causes separate problems, notwithstanding the climate change agenda to do with congestion, etc., etc. So we're aware of those problems. We'd all like to see improvements and things done about those hotspots, which obviously require resource, and we know the story. But as far as this net zero carbon strategy is concerned, this is our if you like, stab at trying to create an action plan and a strategy to try and reduce to net zero the carbon emissions emitting from Leicestershire by 2045.
Thank you, Blake. And I think, you know, dovetail that with the initiatives in terms of, Jana mentioned and Max mentioned, buildings, new roads and everything. If you start to insulate those to the higher levels that are now proposed within the building regs, so that new properties do use less heat, less energy in general. If, again, you look at the photovoltaic initiative, which our district councils are running. I know in Northwest there are 6,000 new applicants. I checked on the website before coming here to get photovoltaics. If then you say the infrastructure won't stand the amount of electricity required, that's the key. Our citizens are with us in this sense, and they are prepared to back us by putting money into their own roofs, because in the end that with a battery will mean that an electric vehicle can be charged at an even lesser rate than off the grid and be of no penalty to the grid at all. So resilience here is, I think, what the greater public is also beginning to get its head around, and you know, we are all in this together, and it's extremely good to see those sorts of things dovetail with county initiative here. Extremely good. Are there any further points or questions from us? Let me just check. Okay. Yeah, Mr. Hunt.
I've had 1, 2, 3, 4 speakers replying to the few words that I said, and we don't want this to sort of descend into a kind of barroom discussion. You know, we could all discuss this for quite a long time. But the proof of what is being said will be in LTP4, the fourth local transport plan, which we haven't seen yet. And it will be in the responses to local plans, because the districts often come forward with fine plans for reducing car use, so on, but are shot down by county if they either can't afford it or believe it's got to be a road solution all the time. So let's see what they do. Let's see what county come forward with LTP4 and their responses to local plans. My guess is that it'll be a roads programme every time.
I can't answer that. The lead member for highways isn't here to answer that, Mr. Hunt.
I look forward to the scrutiny body that looks at LTP4.
I was going to say it really isn't our remit, but we will look forward to the scrutiny committee that does that. Thank you. As a joint thing, yes, as a joint thing. Right. Any further points or questions from anyone? No, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Bolter. You weren't waving enough.
Oh, no, I was waving goodbye. I did raise this in another meeting and got shot down, but I'll raise it yet again. We've got a number of county farms. It's now becoming more prevalent to not plough the land when we're planting. And I wonder if we could encourage our farmers to do the new method of cultivation rather than start ploughing. Ploughing does harm the environment. It does release gases into the atmosphere which are harmful, and only got a few farms left. I know we've not got hundreds of farms, but if we could set the example and actually prove that it is viable to do that, it might be helpful.
So just in response to that point, yes, we do have a number of county farms, but they're tenanted farms. I think the contractual relations between the tenants and the property are between the property department at County Hall. But in a sense, I think you've just underlined the point that I haven't yet made, but I am going to make, in that we can't do everything here from County Hall. You know, we talk about EV electric infrastructure rollout. A lot of that's going to be done by the private sector. It's not going to be done by County Hall. Equally, what we can do is use our shoulders and our, if you like, officers and intelligence gathering, bring the reports together and make that information available to farmers, to whoever, to study for themselves and to make their own decisions as to how they want to conduct their own business. And one of the things I'm proud about the work we're doing at the moment is this this information will be open source. It will be available to everyone. So if there is information and evidence that we've commissioned from external consultants that help farmers or anybody else that wants to consider different ways of behaving, feel free to use information, and I hope it helps.
Thank you. James.
Yes, just to add to what Blake has said, we're actually working with colleagues in property and with some of our tenant farmers to look at sustainable farming practices. We can't make our tenant farmers farm in a particular way. We have to work with the willing, and we have a number of those that have approached us and said they're interested in exploring more sustainable farming practices. That's something we're actively seeking to do. We're also making them aware of the new environmental land management scheme that's coming in over future years, and hopefully trying to support them and being ready for that and being ready to take advantage of the new funding regime for farming that's going to replace the Common Agricultural Policy. There's also potential opportunities linked to biodiversity net gain, as well as linking to what's just been spoken about, opportunities for farmers to provide solutions to carbon sequestration and storage, be that through the planting of trees or wetland areas or peat bogs, whatever. Unfortunately, last year doesn't lend itself to some of those solutions, but trees and wetlands are two areas that we could potentially look at, as well as soil improvement. If we can improve the quality of our soil, better quality soil absorbs more carbon. So there are a range of options we're looking at actively with the willing tenant farmers that we have at the moment.
Thank you, James.
So if we could capture that, Chair, in some sort of report,
well,
what we're doing in the wider environment.
Right, Mr. Bolton, make the point again, please.
Be nice if we could have some report on that sometime in the future about what the county is doing to encourage that. I'm asking for a full report, some bullet points, what we're doing to improve the environment in our areas that we do control.
Right.
Have influence over.
Chair, just through you,
Yes.
I mean, I can certainly take away the point that certainly the stuff around county farms is of value to the committee. We do produce quite a comprehensive annual environmental performance report. It goes alongside the annual greenhouse gas report, but that environmental performance report is sort of a richer narrative rather than just statistics and performance indicators, and it does take members through how we are progressing on delivering the whole environment strategy. So acknowledging that what we're talking about today is just one pillar of that environment strategy, so how we're tackling carbon, but picking up on James's earlier points, they interact with one another. Things that we do around tackling biodiversity have a direct and potentially beneficial associated relationship with carbon offsetting sequestration. But we do produce an annual report. So at the turn of the year, we normally bring a report, but we can have a look at that report in the context of making sure that it's clear to members what progress has looked like over the last 12 months.
Comfortable with that, Mr. Bolter? Yes. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Joe. Any further comments or questions, ladies and gentlemen? Max, yes, I hear you. I'm just checking everybody else. Okay.
Sorry, just reached my phone when during this discussion. There was a report issued last week indicating a number of authorities that have turned some of their land, their public parks, their country parks over for rewilding, keyword. And I think it might be a question that comes up in due course to follow on from Mr. Bolter's point. Are we choosing to rewild any of our country parks partially? Because it'd be nice to say that we do.
Blake, you have a handle on this in terms of vergers and the like.
So certainly we're working with 50 to 60 parishes on vergers, and I know Mr. Hunt's submitted questions to full council about this before, so he'll be aware of that. In terms of country parks specifically, I might stand corrected, but I think we do, because I received a memo, I was copied into a memo some months ago now, which is why my mind's a bit hazy, but identifying a project that we're involved with that does just that. So I will see if I can find that email or inquire where it came from and see if we can get that information and send it to Mr. Hunt if it exists. Okay.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hunt, okay?
Yeah, it was a report this week, actually, not last week.
Okay. Right. Any further comments or questions? I'm checking. Katie, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that last point. We're also looking at opportunities to improve our land holdings, so country parks, farms, through biodiversity net gain. And there's already pilots underway at one country park in particular, and a second hopefully being developed, which look at how we can use developer contributions to improve biodiversity. So it might not specifically be rewilding, but it's looking at how we manage land for biodiversity and use private contributions to fund that. So I think that's an area of work which will really increase over the next couple of years as that legislation becomes mandatory.
Thank you, Katie. Any further points or questions? No? Right. Then with that, on to agenda item 12, to advise of any items which I've decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. And as before, there are no urgent items. And item 13, the date of the next meeting. Well, the next meeting is scheduled to take place on the 2nd of September 2022 at 2 p.m. And then another meeting on the 20th of October at 2022 to feed everything from the presently live consultation, which will go up to Cabinet from us here. Can I then say thank you very much, members and officers, for your enlightened discussion, and I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.